forces of nature that dominate the universe. Imagine a power greater than all of these. The power of the human mind. A power that could move objects through space, interact with computers, control the fall of the dice. Is this scientific possibility or just a dream? Enter the fifth dimension and find out if there is such a thing as mind over matter. Can things be moved just by the power of the mind?
Seeing the table move actually scared the hell out of me. It's clear that we were not lifting it with our fingers touching the tabletop very lightly. And this went on for about 3 hours in broad daylight.
Scientists now believe we only use about 7% of our brain capacity. So what of the other 93%? Could there be hidden powers deep in the recesses of our minds? Imagine a power that could think photographs into existence, levitate at will, overcome the laws of chance and change the odds of winning at the casino.
Anything is possible.
It's doing something that science says it shouldn't do.
Many have claimed these extraordinary powers. Were they all just clever frauds?
Like plastic. It's gonna go now. Look.
Or is there really such a thing as PK, psychokinesis, the power of the mind to control the physical world? Scientists everywhere are trying to unlock its secrets.
From a physicist's point of view, it seems very unlikely that such events should occur.
So this is real. These effects are incontrovertible.
Psychokinesis has always aroused controversy in the scientific world. It seems to contradict the fundamental laws of physics. The cold light of science has exposed many myths, but not this one. In fact, new research is forcing us to face the possibility that there may be powers in the world that we have yet to understand. The idea that all life is interconnected is an enduring spiritual tradition. Now, one group of scientists think advances in computer technology may help them to prove it exists and react to major events worldwide. And this computer and the small box attached, codenamed the Egg, might hold the answer. But what kind of event could join minds together and trigger the equipment into life? New York, September the 11th, 2001. The tragedy unfolding will change the world forever. 50 kilometers away at Princeton University, the gauges of Dr. Roger Nelson's EGG machine are going berserk.
Before the actual crash occurred, before about 9 o'clock, I knew nothing. I was happy-go-lucky. I was writing letters how the world was peaceful, right? Well, the world was not peaceful, and already the data, before I knew anything about it, the data were changing.
For 5 years, Roger Nelson has been running the Global Consciousness Project. He collects data from what are called random event generators. 75 standalone computers have been set up around the world. They produce continuous random combinations of numbers that are sent back to Princeton. Nelson monitors the machines, looking for any unusual deviations in the data. The aim is to see if human responses to world events can influence their output. Anyone who works closely with machines knows how temperamental they can be. But how can remote computers without operators interact with human minds? Nelson admits he doesn't know how it happens, but he's certain it takes place. September the 11th is his best example. His data went off the scale. His work is the electronic equivalent of tossing a coin.
A true coin has a 50-50 probability of being heads or tails, and you can't predict it if it's thrown properly. So electronic random number generators do that properly. They flip coins, so to speak, high speed, produce a lot of ones and zeros or a lot of heads and tails, and you cannot predict the sequence at all.
Nelson's machines are as close to pure chance as it's possible to get, so a regular pattern should be very unusual. So when they do show up, the team is convinced that something very extraordinary is happening. Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Science worked with the project. He also believes that global consciousness must exist. He set up the network of eggs around the globe and thinks they hold the key to unlocking this mystery.
They called it originally the EGG, for electrogaiagram, which is an analogy to electroencephalogram, the EEG. In other words, we want a bunch of sensors around the brain of the planet to see if we can find patterns in exactly the same way that we look at patterns that go on in the brain.
On the morning of September the 11th, 2001, as the American Airlines flight left Logan International Airport, the computers appeared to do something extraordinary.
"4 days before September 11th, where the eggs are just doing what they normally do, nothing. They're wandering randomly. And then all of a sudden, on September 11th, there's a trend that takes off, which is extremely unusual.
The random event generators began to synchronize, overriding the laws of chance. Could this have been connected to the attacks?
We have now 5 years of data, and on 2 or 3 of the measures, this 9/11 outcome is unique. There's nothing else like it in the database.
News of the catastrophe flashed round the world, and the world stood in shock. Could this surge of emotion explain the mysterious data? Nelson is sure it does.
Human consciousness interacts with the physical world in the form of a random event generator in such ways to change the output.
In San Francisco, California, is the Cognitive Science Laboratory, set up to assess scientists working in unusual fields. James Spottiswoode is professor of physics there. What does he make of Nelson's theory?
The hypothesis of the Global Consciousness Project that the consciousness of the world's human beings has an impact upon random number generators has a big problem in its definition. We don't know really how to define what conscious state 6 billion people are in, and to what extent the 6 billion different people have a consciousness or a conscious state that is in sync with each other. These are not measurable quantities.
Nelson's conclusions are based on meticulous statistical analysis. But statistics are not always the whole story.
One of the problems is that you can always find improbable things in random data if you just do enough kind of different tests, consider enough different time periods, different statistics. Some of them will pop out as being quite unlikely.
If the machines did register human responses, can this be seen as proof of the power of the mind over matter?
The question whether this effect that we see in the global consciousness data is PK is a tough one. You know, there are several alternative explanations that people talk about, and I talk about. One of them is what you could call PK, meaning something like something comes out of our minds as a group and changes the way the REGs work.
Science has long been trying to make sense of the paranormal. At the University of Maryland, Professor Steve Broad lectures on the history of psychokinetic research.
As I said, some people regard repeatability as a criterion for distinguishing science from non-science, so that any branch of science that doesn't offer repeatable experiments doesn't count as a legitimate branch of science.
And one of the problems of assessing psychokinesis is that it's very difficult to repeat or replicate individual experiments. One thing that interests Broad is that the birth of modern science and fascination with the paranormal seem to go together.
The golden age of large-scale or macro-PK was during the spiritualist movement, roughly between 1850 and 1930. It's not so much that it was hip to be a medium, but it was certainly acceptable to be a medium during that period.
19th century British physician Sir William Crookes was one of many respectable scientists excited by the paranormal. He focused on Scottish medium Daniel Douglas Hume, famous for playing his accordion without touching its keys. For one test, the instrument was isolated in a cage, but somehow it just kept on playing. At the same time, inquisitive Victorians in Britain founded the Society of Psychical Research to investigate these strange events. It's still going strong. Its president, Professor James Poynton, has taken a special interest in Hume's case.
At other events, Hume put the accordion in someone else's hands, someone who couldn't play an accordion, and the thing just simply began playing on its own. And sometimes Hume would take his hands completely away from the accordion and just sat there and played on its own. So there was no set accordion that could be said, oh, well, this is a trick accordion, it's got a machine inside and it plays automatically, because that wasn't the case.
Eusapia Palladino was an Italian woman living at the same time. She too had apparently extraordinary talents. Countless reports document her ability to make tables glide unsupported through the air. But none of them could explain how she did it.
What interests me about the cases of Hume, Palladino, and some of the others during the great heyday of mediumship is that the phenomena can't be so easily explained away. The technology wasn't there to simulate the phenomena, the conditions of observation were too good, and we can't resort simply to cheap explanations in terms of fast hands and diversion techniques.
The 19th century observations of levitation and ghostly phenomena by D.D. Hume and others, I think are fundamentally unaccessible. Anecdotal evidence from that far in the past, where one has no ability to control the environment and to understand what the circumstances exactly were that these alleged events occurred under. I suspect that there's nothing much you can do with this data, except to say that something apparently odd may have occurred, but I don't think it's of any use in science.
But there are baffling cases modern science has been able to reach. Extraordinary stories of a Russian housewife began to filter through the Iron Curtain in the 60s. "33-year-old Nina Kulagina claimed psychokinetic powers. Her husband filmed her first attempts, and scientists have been arguing ever since.
Kulagina apparently has the ability to move small objects over relatively small distances with a great deal of psychic effort. What troubles me about a case like that is that the phenomena are inherently small scale.
Over 40 international scientists were called in to examine Kulagina under controlled conditions. They claimed there was no rational explanation for her mysterious powers, but modern scientists are skeptical. French parapsychologist Mario Varvoglis.
She was attacked many times by skeptics, Russian and otherwise, but I don't know of any legitimate, good critiques of her work. So if that does not exist, if there are no good critiques, then the phenomena that seem to produce are quite impressive.
In 1967, the unforgiving cameras were again focused on her, this time by a Russian team. Even in close-up, it's hard to see how she's making the box shift across the table, but it certainly is moving. Russian physicist Leonid Ryzhkov was present and observed her closely.
People who perform these kind of acts are under an enormous physical pressure. The veins of Kulagina were swollen. She started to sweat, and if she was lifting a heavy item, she really had to make an effort to achieve this.
Dr. Ryzhkov and his team built an airtight glass box for the experiments. This was to prevent any possibility of her using magnets or an electrostatic charge, or even blowing objects with her breath. Again, the results were startling.
Kulagina could move the matches as if a wind had pushed them. She didn't feel too well that day and did not want to experiment with larger objects. But through the glass box, any form of physical manipulation would have been impossible.
Whatever else was happening, it was clear Kulagina was using enormous amounts of energy during the sessions. She lost weight. She complained of headaches. During one PK test, her pulse rate soared to over 200 beats a minute. Her brain activity registered 4 times normal level. Usually, she only gave sessions after many hours of careful preparation, which made some critics suspicious. But one day she was caught off guard. In 1974, 2 German scientists paid her a surprise visit. Psychologist Jürgen Keil from the University of Tasmania was one of them.
Als wir dorthin kamen, war sie zunächst etwas zögernd, aber als sie dann erfuhr, dass überhaupt niemand etwas von dieser...
When we arrived, she hesitated a bit, but when she heard that nobody knew of the whole thing, she was very friendly and invited us to come in and invited us to stay to have dinner with her. And she even started to move things while we were still eating.
Wie wir noch sozusagen beim Abendessen waren.
Keil filmed Kulagina at work in her own home. How did she do it? Paranormal strength or just clever trickery? Even now, he's not sure.
I have to say that this experiment with the table tennis ball was really quite impressive, and I would like to hear from, let's say, a magician about how he would have done it under those circumstances.
Kulagina died in 1981 after a heart attack. She made one last recording before her death, and for the first time, she failed. Had her psychic powers deserted her? Or had she just run out of the energy needed to maintain the deception?
In our opinion, she was a true phenomenon. I think these kinds of skills are inherited. This phenomena is a talent that you are born with. You can't learn it.
The PK craze swept through Russia. Suddenly, everyone was reading thoughts and shifting furniture. No one matched Kulagina's skills. The same research team that had assessed her turned their attention to Boris Ermolov. He claimed he could suspend objects in mid-air using only the power of his mind. But when an American film team investigated him, a different picture emerged. Under the bright lights and on camera, the trick was exposed. In case his psychic powers failed, he had fixed a fine thread between his knees to create the illusion of objects floating in mid-air. America too had its crop of people claiming strange and unusual powers. Ted Serios, the self-styled thoughtographer, was one. His apparent skill was imposing images on film just by thinking about it. Professional photographers focused on Serios' black gizmo, a black paper cylinder which he placed against the camera lens and stared into.
One of the standard myths about Serios is that his anomalous images were all produced through holding a gizmo, which is a rolled-up piece of cardboard, in front of the camera, in which allegedly Ted would conceal some sort of transparency that would then be recorded on film.
The photographers maintained substituting a prepared transparency could be done easily, and the result on film would be the same.
It's a nonsensical explanation. It doesn't even begin to approach an explanation of the very best cases. For example, there were many cases where Ted wasn't even near the camera, where he held no gizmo whatsoever.
Then, in 1974, the most famous PK practitioner of all arrived on stage. Uri Geller had always known he was different.
The first time that I realized that I had something very strange, maybe even unique, was when I was 4 years old. And I was simply eating soup in my mother's kitchen in Tel Aviv, where I grew up. And suddenly, as I lifted the spoon towards my mouth, it actually started bending and it broke in half.
ist keine Maschine, die anläuft. Kann nicht garantieren, das geht ins
On German television, he demonstrated for the first time his unique ability for making solid objects bend under the touch of his hand.
an vielen privaten Experimenten feststellen können, aber die Kräfte sind nicht einfach abrufbar.
Yes, you feel it? When I realized that I can bewilder and astonish and amaze and shock people with my abilities, I realized that I can make money with it. Please, please. Yeah, oh, yes, it's going slowly, slowly. Please. It's like there.
Overnight, he became an international sensation.
Germany went crazy. I was on the cover of Der Spiegel. I was on the cover of, gosh, probably Stern and Bunte, Herzu, you name it. Bild Zeitung ran a series with me. I went and bent the ring of the mayor in Munich. I stopped the cable car going up on the mountain. And I was every day front page story in Bild Zeitung. And then the same happened in every country around the world.
Audiences loved him, but scientists were already arguing about how the trick was done.
I'm too tight up.
And there was also the so-called Geller effect. People reported that while watching his TV shows, bizarre things happened in their homes. Spoons bent, clocks stopped, keys broke in the locks. Remote control? For Geller, it was an exhausting roller coaster ride.
Yes, I was earning a lot of money, and that's what I did. But then, one day, suddenly it hit me back, and I couldn't handle it anymore, and I was blown apart. I became addicted to bulimia, and I was killing myself. I was depressed. I had panic attacks. I had anxiety attacks.
Would you welcome, please, Uri Geller.
An appearance on the Johnny Carson show through Geller. Expecting to be interviewed, he was unexpectedly confronted with a collection of objects.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
We have only met...
This scares me.
This scares you? Well, this is we just got some things together here. All right.
You know, I'm surprised because before this program, your producer came and he read me at least 40 questions you're going to ask me.
Well, I can ask you all kinds of questions if you'd like me to ask you questions.
I have to have time, and
you don't feel what, strong tonight?
I don't feel strong. It's not all tonight. Right now, I'm feeling being pressed, and then I can't.
Well, I'm not trying to press you. I really not.
No, you're only telling me, well, will you try that or that or that?
Well, I thought that was the idea of. No, I'm not trying to put you down.
Part of the problem is that it's such an uncontrolled situation that you have a person manipulating a piece of metal back and forth for many minutes. You can't measure easily what's going on in the metal while they're doing it. So you're separated from as a physicist, you're separated from measuring the event very easily.
The skill of a magician is to create illusions. And if we know how it was done every time, the magic would be lost forever. So is Geller nothing more than a supremely clever conjurer? Today he lives quietly in a large house outside London. He didn't make his fortune bending spoons, but from dowsing for oil. Scientists are still interested in how he achieved his most famous effect. One who studied his work closely is physicist Freebert Karger.
I can say that through the research I did with Uri Geller, what I discovered could not be explained through any kind of physical interference with the objects. I looked at various things, such as the possibility of manipulating the objects, but this did not appear to take place. There had to be another explanation.
Many have tried to expose Geller as a fake, but to this day, nobody has really succeeded. What he does defies logical explanation. Karger thinks science is approaching the problem in the wrong way.
I think we can establish that this phenomena does exist. It's a reality. But you can't describe how this takes place through the language and theory of physics.
And now, let me show you what made me famous. It's unbelievable, but it was a spoon. And this is what I did. What happens here is it becomes almost like, yes, you see? Look, the handle is becoming soft, almost like plastic, because the metal is being changed. The molecular structure, see? It's very soft, it's like plastic. It's gonna go now. Look.
I think it's most important that people research such phenomena and then try to find a model in the physics that fits to the phenomena.
The first scientific attempt to create a different model came from an unexpected quarter, the world of gambling. Every year, millions of people try their luck and live their dreams in the halls of Las Vegas's casinos. There are fortunes to be made and lost, and strict security ensures there's no chance of cheating. But what if the power of psychokinesis could be used to affect the fall of the dice or the spin of the wheel and change the odds in the gambler's favor? 70 years ago, one man tried his luck when he approached Joseph Rhine, who worked at Duke University, North Carolina. Rhine's daughter, Sally Feathers, remembers the day.
I think it was in the middle 30s, 1934, 35. A gambler, a man who was a professional gambler, came by the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory and said, "Hey, Doc, let me show you what I can do. I can influence dice mentally by just willing them to come up." Well, of course, we've heard claims like that from many people from casinos, but it had never been looked at, to my knowledge, it had never been looked at in a scientific way until that time.
Rhine wanted to know if the mind could influence the fall of the dice, so he set up tests under laboratory conditions. But his results are no longer accepted. Jessica Utz from the University of California.
I think there were problems with some of the early experiments, as there were in many statistical experiments. It was a brand new field, people, both statistics and parapsychology, and people didn't understand the kinds of controls that you needed to have. So, for example, it may be that certain faces of the dice weigh more than others, and those kinds of things were not taken into account.
Rhine wanted to see if it was possible to do what any gambler wants: make the machine throw the winning numbers just by focusing on it. Surprisingly, some of his results suggested that it really was possible to affect the way the dice fell.
It's very interesting to have this store come up.
In the case of the PK dice experiments, the effect itself is quite small, and yet it's statistically significant. The practical significance or practical importance, I think, comes from the fact that it is doing something that science says it shouldn't do. And so even though it's a very tiny effect, that may have huge significance in terms of trying to rewrite the laws of science.
Rhine's work quickly hit the headlines. The scientific community was not sure whether to take him seriously, and in the outside world, his work became a joke. However, one scientist believed Rhine was onto something. Physicist Helmut Schmidt was working for Boeing, the aircraft manufacturers.
Rhine himself did dice experiments, and it seemed just sensible to me to repeat these in a more respectable setting, if you like, by using electronic devices.
So Schmidt developed an early random event generator.
So I took a Geiger counter which was connected to a weak radioactive preparation. This was connected to a speaker which would read the responses of the preparation in a random order. I would then use this series of sounds as the basis of a random generator.
Determined to make the best use of modern science to unlock the secrets of psychokinesis, Schmidt worked from home, funding his own equipment. The outcome was a machine based on a light system.
Here we have a basic generator that creates a series of ones and zeros. They get translated into a light that rotates clockwise or anti-clockwise. And the participant's job is to change the direction of the lights by influencing the random generator to produce more ones than zeros.
Schmidt asked his volunteers to focus on the lights. Then he told them to try and change their direction just through the power of thought. The similarity of the results from the two sets of experiments with lights and dice was remarkable. Schmidt's data clearly suggested that his subjects were influencing the way the lights moved round the dial, just with their minds. Schmidt knew what he had found could be vital to Boeing, so he took his results straight to them.
Then I could go to the people at Boeing with confidence and say, yes, it is something very basic that we don't know much about yet. But look, we've done some experiments, so let's repeat these experiments from the viewpoint of a physicist.
machen solche Experimente.
What Schmidt had realized was that every electronic device is a potential random event generator. The cockpit of an aeroplane is full of such instruments. If the pilot's mind affected them, it could be highly dangerous. At first, Boeing supported his work, but later withdrew. The chance of such theoretical dangers becoming real seemed too remote. Schmidt remains convinced by his results.
I have no doubts about the existence of psychokinesis, but I quite understand the doubts of my colleagues. Even when I was reading Rhine's things, it was too distant. It didn't really mean much to me, and I was only convinced when I did my own experiments.
At Princeton University, other scientists were also beginning to take an interest in psychokinesis. In 1979, the engineering faculty set up the PEAR Institute, headed up by Professor Robert Jahn.
The word PEAR is an acronym, P-E-A-R, P for Princeton, E for engineering, A for anomalies, R for research. So we are a laboratory in an academic environment that is attempting to study the engineering aspects of anomalous, mind-correlated phenomena.
Once again, it was an aircraft manufacturing company that was interested in these strange forces.
The first major supporter of the program was James S. McDonnell, the patriarch of the McDonnell Douglas Aerospace Corporation.
The company had recently experienced a series of mysterious, fatal crashes. They needed to find explanations. Could PK be the cause?
His statement to me was that he could not in good conscience put a young man in the cockpit of an F-18 and be totally confident that in times of stress, in combat or other emergency situation, that all of the equipment that was controlling the airplane was not somehow being disturbed by the emotional state of the crew.
After James McDonnell died, the company withdrew support for PEAR, but the scientists continue to try and produce a scientific understanding of PK behavior. They study events that happen too often just to be coincidence, but have no apparent cause. Can science produce a model to deal with this? Brenda Dunn from the PEAR Institute explains.
All of the experiments, regardless of their physical nature, have this random element, and all of the protocols involve having the operator trying to influence, to affect this random process, to shift the output one way or another.
The Institute does all kinds of experiments. The results often exceed anything expected by chance. Here, the subject is trying to influence the rhythm of the drum. It's slow work. After 25 years of research, Dunn is just starting to draw some conclusions.
In our efforts to model these phenomena, we have postulated that the actual effect does not come out of the conscious, cognitive part of the mind, but out of the unconscious, out of some much more fundamental subconscious or unconscious part.
This is a real breakthrough. For a long time, psychokinesis has been believed to be the product of conscious thought. In this test, for example, the subject is attempting to influence the height of the water stream just through the power of her concentration. But the idea that the answer might lie in the subconscious mind opens up new and exciting avenues of research. In the 21st century, it's robots that are pushing the boundaries, as French psychologist René Payoc explains.
The participant lies in bed and we wait until he is asleep. At this moment, one of the researchers enters the room, starts the robot and leaves. The experiment lasts for about 20 minutes, and then the robot stops.
A random event generator powers the robot. The aim is to see if the sleeping, unconscious mind can influence the direction in which it moves. It's assumed that if the robot comes too near, the sleeper will try and make it go away. The results are startling.
These experiments appeared to show that it was possible for a sleeping human being to unconsciously influence the generation of chance inside the robot, and hence change its direction.
Payoc's recordings show the path the robot takes, and it seems to show that when the robot gets too close for the sleeper's comfort, it moves away in a defined direction. Is it really driven by the power of the unconscious sleeping mind? In Princeton, Dr. Roger Nelson also thinks intuition might be the key to unlock this mysterious side of the human mind. 15 years ago, he started to wonder if collective human emotions experienced in a group could influence the output of random event generators.
We started doing a series of experiments which we called field REG, field reg experiments, and went to conventions and concerts and operas, and what we found is that places where there was a kind of coherence and resonance in the group, there the REGs would deviate from their normal behavior or from the expected behavior. In other words, the REGs, field REGs, could see, so to speak, a group consciousness.
Were the machines really registering human emotions?
What we're trying to look at in these field experiments is the coalescence of a group consciousness. We're trying to look at resonance, kind of a pure resonance where among people, which we believe may extend to our machine as well. So after many, many experiments like that, it became, you begin to think about other possibilities. What about running two of these things? What if we take a look at something that's happening on television, like the Oscars or the O.J. Simpson trial, and take data from something running in Europe, take data from another one running in the States, and combine those?
In 1997, a tragic event provided Nelson with the ideal opportunity to put these ideas into action. On August the 31st, in a dingy Paris underpass, Diana, Princess of Wales, was killed in a car crash. Her sudden tragic death sent shockwaves around the globe.
Diana was killed, and that was, as you know, as everybody remembers, it was a point of focus for really large numbers of people. And I, again, organized a group data collection on the day of the funeral. And we had, I think, 12 or maybe it was 14 REGs in Europe and the United States. And all of those data were combined, and we got a large effect.
In the wake of Diana's death, public grieving hit unprecedented levels. Were these intense emotional responses powerful enough to influence physical matter? For Nelson, this surge in global consciousness opened up a whole new avenue in his research.
Not long after that Diana incident, I brought physiologists who think about brain waves and parapsychologists who think about mind-matter interaction, brought them together, and Dean Radin and Dick Bierman and I were standing in a hall talking about, the possibilities, and Dean said, "Why don't we make a world EEG?" He's talking about something like the electrodes that go on a person's skull. Now, instead, you put REGs on the whole Earth as if it was a giant brain. And that's what we did.
The result was the Global Consciousness Project, with random event generators set up in 75 different locations across the globe. Roger Nelson has been meticulously analyzing the data for 8 years, and he has become convinced human responses to great world events are being registered by his machines. (1999), and war is raging in the Balkans. In February, NATO starts to bomb Yugoslavia. As with September the 11th, REGs around the world synchronized their responses to this critical event.
This shows 3 hours before the bombing, which you can see is just wandering level, no interesting stuff happening. Right at the moment the bombing begins, we begin to see a tremendous change in the way the data look.
Since the project was set up, Nelson has measured 149 regular patterns, all of which he believes relate to a collective emotional response to world events. Could the results of 9/11 take us nearer to proving the reality of PK? Physicist James Spottiswoode is still unconvinced.
There are many hundreds of experiments of that kind done in very carefully controlled conditions. And there are very small effects, but because they have been done so many times, and you put them all together, you end up with something which is very improbable, that is just a fluke or is by chance. Do I think that there is evidence that PK exists? I would have to give a guarded no. The central problem with research into psychokinesis of random number generators is that the effects are very, very small. So one needs a large number of trials occupying many, many hundreds of hours to get enough of an effect to be able to test whether other kinds of external factors in the experiment may be having an effect on them.
PK literally means psychokinesis. It means moving something with your mind, and it's probably misleading. At least now, if you stay with the data, you can say, we've got a correlation, and it's a very interesting one. Big event happens in the world, big changes happen in the data. Just exactly why and how remains to be learned.
So far, Nelson's experiments only measure responses to events. They may even show that the joining of many minds is strong enough to be measured. Many scientists remain skeptical, but if it could be proved, the fundamental laws of the known universe would be blown apart. But what if that power could be used to control events before they happen? Not just to respond, but to decide the future. It's a dream some fear.
The grim truth, it seems to me, is that if we can make the world a better place with our psychic abilities, we can also do harm with our psychic abilities. And the real lesson then may be that we just need to work on our own self-control.